Um, Today, I think I would like to travel down a bit of a timeline, starting off with what brought you to UT, your time at UT, and with Texas Crew, how you joined Texas Crew, following up into your career in law, what led you to leave that to pursue the doc, and where we are now.
Yeah, so I went to UT. I had grown up in Austin, went to Westwood High School, and had participated in football and track. Those were my two main sports in high school, and I was looking for a new sport, came to UT, and my roommate was, who also is tall, was recruited by the coach at the time, Mike Canati, off of the West Campus. They had an erg out there. I don't think the recruiting methods have changed much.
No.
This was 1986, and they tried to recruit my roommate, but he said, "No, I'm not interested, but I've got a tall roommate, me." And he told me about the tryouts, went to the tryout, and made the Texas Crew team, and that was the start of rowing for me back in 1986.
So back then, when there were tryouts, you actually had to meet a standard to be on the team?
They had, I want to say we had 40 to 50 guys show up. And so we had to, they brought it down to more manageable, say 20.
Okay.
So we had a sort of a tryout where we did, I think we ran around the track, we may have done some push-ups, maybe some pull-ups, and I do recall there was some rigor to it, and so yeah, that's how they selected the team.
Awesome. So why UT? What brought you to UT specifically? You know, I'm sure that there were different opportunities that you could have.
Yeah. So I went to UT because everybody in my family went to UT.
Okay.
I grew up in Austin. I was, everybody who lives in Austin, of course, we get inundated with the University of Texas stuff.
Yeah.
And my dad had taught at UT in the 60s. My mother had graduated from her with a master's degree from UT. They're both English. And so UT was part of our family already. And that's how I got it. That's what the reason. And I've always wanted to be a Longhorn.
Yeah. I think the unique thing about Austin is how fast it's been growing. I think that Austin is the fastest, perhaps, growing city in the United States.
Certainly
So
the fastest growing big city.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So how has that affected the school UT and Austin as a whole?
Well, Austin as a whole has changed a lot. When I moved here in 1976 with my family, I think there were 300,000 people in Austin.
Wow.
And I want to say there's over 2 million in the metro area right now. So that's a huge growth. And one of the biggest areas of growth, of course, has been downtown. There was, back even 20 years ago, there weren't any people living downtown, except there were a few apartment complexes.
What was in downtown? That's just.
It was just surface parking. There was a rail, sort of a brickyard district, and that was it. It was very, maybe a few 1 or 2 story buildings. I can recall I used to work as a lawyer down on the river, in a building on the river next to the Four Seasons. We would walk, the nearest place to get lunch would be on 6th Street, and we would just walk across parking lots to get.
It's funny that you say grab lunch on 6th Street.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of transformed into.
Yeah, everything's a little. I mean, everything's a little different in that amount of time. But the biggest difference has been just the growth of downtown living, because nobody lived downtown, and now Austin's downtown living scene is probably the biggest in the country.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how has the geography changed? But I think you've made it clear that downtown has just sort of sprung up in the past. Would you say 2 decades?
I'd say since 2000.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Aside from, I guess, the school being a center of learning and driving young people to the city, what else has attracted so many people to Austin?
Well, the economy's great, and Texas. I think Austin has the best of all worlds in that it's in a business-friendly state, but it's a very sort of liberal and progressive city. So you get a really good vibe, and of course, Austin has got a lot going for it. The live music capital of the world. It's beautiful area of the world, and of course, Lady Bird Lake is also a huge part of it.
You know, as a big city grows, more people come into it, I think the environment sometimes takes a hit. Would you say that the environment of Austin, the social and physical environment, is better or worse off than I guess it has been in the past?
Well, I know a lot of people who've been around as long as I have in Austin lament the passing of the old days. But I'm not one of those people. I live downtown. I enjoy living downtown. I think Austin is a great city. Got so, all the young people in Austin make it a really, it's got a great energy.
Yeah.
And I think you really notice it when you leave Austin and go somewhere else and spend a little time somewhere else and go, wow, this place is kind of dull.
Yeah.
When you live in Austin, you're used to a certain level of activity, and there's always festivals happening, and it's just a great city to live in, I think.
You know, you brought up a really important point, that is, when you do something or when you're a part of something, there's something going on. When you transition, it feels like lesser than, and you can kind of sense that transition immediately. So, I mean, would you say that rowing kind of contributed to that for you? Because I know it has for me. Now when I take on a different challenge, it doesn't feel as thrilling because I've been a part of something that's so difficult. Would you say the same?
Yeah. I mean, rowing's been a huge part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say definitely that rowers tend to, when you find out somebody is a rower, you immediately gravitate to that person. Hey, where did you row? What did you do? Because the great thing about rowing is there's a lot of common suffering.
Oh, yeah.
That brings people together.
Yeah, John knows.
People. Yeah, so that's a big part of rowing. There's not a lot of rowers, but many of them do it with very little fanfare. Maybe their parents know that they row,
That's true.
and maybe their parents show up to the regatta. But rowing is a sport that you take up not for the fame, the glory, or the money. You do it because you enjoy the sport and you enjoy the camaraderie that goes with being part of a team.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you mentioned something about how rowing has kind of fallen off in the public eye. I think, dog wants to
This is Marley.
Yeah, Marley. Sorry. But I think that rowing's kind of fallen off. What do you think contributed to that? Because it used to be such a popular sport. It was the first collegiate athletics. So why do you think it's kind of fallen off, and do you think it's coming back?
Well, I would say that rowing, there was allegedly gambling with rowing back in the late 1800s. People would, and it was one of the biggest spectator sports back in the 1800s. That may say a lot for the great sports that have come along since then to supplant rowing, or it may just be that rowing is not a great spectator sport.
Yeah.
I've never found it to be personally it's more of a participant sport.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot more fun to participate in rowing than it is to actually watch it. But I will say that in my time in rowing, the best thing that's happened to rowing, and I think probably in the history of the United States rowing scene, was Title IX and women's rowing becoming a Division I college sport, varsity sport. And of course, at the University of Texas, we have one of the very best varsity programs. But as a result of that, Title IX, the women's programs have popped up all over the country in places that you wouldn't expect rowing. Tennessee has a great program. Kansas has programs. Places that you just would not expect. And Oklahoma has a Division I program. So I think that's been the biggest positive for rowing in the past 50 years. And as a result, when you have these big varsity programs, typically you'll also have a club program that will be created for the guys. And you guys have been a part of that program, so a program like that. So that's been the best thing for rowing, I think. And I wouldn't say that rowing has been in decline. I would say, if anything, the overall popularity of rowing in this country has increased during my time as a rower, in that it has, there have been rowing venues and regattas and people getting rowing outside of the coast states. In the past, in the history of rowing, East Coast and West Coast. Saw the boys in the boat. That was a West Coast team. East Coast was where all the Ivies were. It was kind of an elitist sport. And I don't think it's that way now. I think with the opportunities that have been created through Title IX and women's rowing, we've had a lot of rowing crop up in places that it wouldn't be or wasn't, say, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I can personally say I'm very glad for that. Yeah,
I am too.
yeah. So, would you say you've been a part of the club? I don't know, how many years did you spend on Texas Crew?
I was on the team for 4 years, and I was captain of the men's team a couple of last two.
All right. So I think you have a pretty good sense of like the team dynamic, what goes on behind the scenes. Would you say that Texas Crew, being a student-led organization, not really having much oversight, would you say that that is something that makes the team very unique? And how does it stand out compared to other student-led organizations on campus and across the nation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixed bag with, and I was part of the students group that ran the team, so I understand the positives and the negatives. Most rowing organizations have a head coach who's in charge. For Texas Crew and for many of the clubs, the students are actually the ones in, and they're encouraged by the university to run the club and to be active in its operation and all that. Kind of creates an interesting dynamic because often the coaches are accountable to the athletes, and that can lead to political decisions or whatever. And it can also sort of weaken the coach's position a little bit. So that's a negative. The positive is that the students get an opportunity to run an organization and learn as part of their education how to do that, how to work with other people.
Yeah.
And so that's a real positive.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I mean, working as a treasurer or a fundraiser or even a president who manages all the logistics, I think you learn a lot, especially under all the pressure you're in. And before we go on to that, there's a story I really want to know about Texas Crew, about our history, which is our boathouse, because we weren't always at the dock. You founded the dock in 2002, correct?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Well, a quick sort of timeline on the Rowing Center.
Yeah.
I worked there when I was at UT in the late 80s. And in the late 90s, I came back. I was a lawyer, had left Austin, came back to Austin, and my former employer was having trouble renewing that concession. It was a small operation. The dock was probably 30 feet long and was sinking. But she had trouble getting renewal. I worked with her on the legal aspects of it. We ended up getting a renewal. She made me a partner. A few years later, I bought her out in 2002. So 2002 was the year I became the sole owner of Texas Rowing Center. And then we built it along the way. It's not always been a floating boathouse like it is now. That was done in 20.
Well, I'm excited to get into that because I have a lot of questions. I watched the video actually on YouTube that you made with, I believe they're Board Safe Dogs, right?
Yeah.
They did a really great job with the boathouse, and I'd love to ask you about that.
Yep.
But one really big question I have is, where was the original Texas Crew boathouse? I heard that we went through 2 boathouse fires. We lost 2 fleets of boats, and we had to literally build up from the ground up. So what happened? Do you know that story?
Well, I know that when I was part of Texas Texas Crew, back in the 80s, we rowed originally out of what is now became the youth hostel over on the east side for 1 year. And then in 87, there was a new boathouse built for Austin Rowing Club. That was their Austin Rowing Club's original boathouse downtown. That boathouse was where Texas Crew lived for probably the next 30 years.
Wow.
And they were part of Austin Rowing Club, used the equipment. We used the equipment of Austin Rowing Club. They were very generous with us. Probably around 2000, the warehouse that's behind Austin Rowing Club, up the top, became open, and the people that owned it generously loaned it to Texas Crew. And so Texas Crew had a boathouse a large indoor area for probably 15 years. In 2015 or thereabouts, I had heard that they lost the use of that facility, and they were on a trailer down near the river. So at that point, I invited them to come, having gained a lot from my association with Texas Crew. I wanted to pay it back, so that's when I brought Texas Crew to the rowing center, and that's how Texas Crew ended up there. The fires you referred to, I know of one fire. I'm not sure where the
I
other.
heard that the trailer caught fire.
The trailer caught fire. That was the one I remember. That was a TRC trailer that was carrying Texas Crew equipment to Oklahoma, and the short story is that the trailer became decoupled and coasted to the side of the road just as it's supposed to. Nobody got hurt, but the chain that was connecting the trailer to the truck dragged on the asphalt, got hot, and when it hit the dry grass, it caused a spontaneous fire. One thing we learned is that rowing shells burn very easily. They're carbon fiber with a lot of resin in them.
Right.
And there are some pretty spectacular videos out there of this thing blowing up.
Whoa.
So it was almost like a mushroom cloud.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good send off for a boat once you're done with it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, I know that, and I'm not sure those boats were done, but they were after that. And Texas Crew wisely had insured all those boats. Then they did a GoFundMe with the video and the shots of the fire.
Wow,
And they were able to raise a lot of money, and I think that's how they bought the most recent fleet.
I think, yeah, that's true. And I think that speaks to the resourcefulness of the students.
That's true.
Because they probably didn't have a lot of help from UT.
I don't think so. I think they did it all on their own.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that by taking on challenges like that, you prepare yourself for the challenges of life, which we'll get into in a second. But before that, before we leave your college years, I want to ask you, one of the biggest challenges for me is finding a solid balance between my academic life and my athletic life. Sometimes it feels like there's no balance at all, and I'm just doing one side or the other. So how did you deal with that as a student, and how do you feel like managing that helped you in the future?
So I would say I wasn't a great example in that I spent a lot of time running Texas Crew and rowing, and it probably was at the expense of my academic career at UT. I was a chemical engineer, and I did graduate in 4 years, and I didn't bomb the program, but I could have probably spent more time studying. But I was so involved at TRC at Texas Crew, and that was a lot more fun.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I spent my focus. But I think the education I got from being a rower was more than made up for the time I lost in chemical engineering classes, because I then went on to train for the Olympics, for the '92 Olympics, which I trained for, got close to, but did not make. Then I went to law school, and as a law school student, I was much more focused, having had time in rowing, especially training for the Olympics, my experience with Texas Crew, and also having had an engineering background. I really, law school was much easier for me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, would you regret not being super involved in your chemical engineering path? Yeah, exactly.
I made the right decisions.
Yeah, I'm glad, yeah.
You cannot replace the education you get from, or your experience that you get from being a part of the team, training early mornings, the sacrifices that you make for the team, being a part of the program. That's all part of your education. And for me, it was like getting a minor or maybe a major in rowing.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, so I have a question here that asks if your career in rowing helped prepare you for law school, and I'm going to assume the question is yes.
Yeah, because once you're used to rowing 30,000 meters a day, whatever it is, being in a law school classroom is pretty easy.
Yeah, right. I realize that's. Yeah.
So you really learn a lot of discipline.
Yeah, I agree. I think that once you start doing really challenging things, that you thought you weren't capable of doing, the things that you previously thought were hard suddenly become
That's
easy.
right. That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what type of law did you end up practicing?
I ended up as an environmental lawyer,
Okay.
and
Oh wow, that's perfect.
and I did environmental law for 20 years. I graduated from Texas Tech Law School in 1996, and then I practiced law at a local firm here at Thompson & Knight for 20 years. Had a great office, like I mentioned, down on the river, so I could see what was going on the river every day, right behind Austin High School.
Awesome.
Austin.
Oh wow, close to the dock. Awesome.
Austin Rowing Club.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's actually perfect for this class because it's called The Land Before Us. It's the whole theme of my class. And it basically is trying to assess what places were before humans came in contact with them, how we have shaped the land. And so could you tell me more about your background as an environmental lawyer? What did that consist of?
Yeah, it took me a little while to kind of find what I enjoyed doing most, and ultimately what I ended up being an expert in was an area called the Voluntary Cleanup Program, which in Texas, historically, almost every corner in any town was a service station at one point or another.
Mm-hmm.
And service stations have a problem with underground storage tanks leaking. So you have a lot of leaking tanks. Also, another example is dry cleaners have a lot of perchloroethylene spills that go through concrete into the groundwater. The program I was involved in was called the Voluntary Cleanup Program, and basically, if you clean it up, the problem with the properties is once they're contaminated, every subsequent owner is liable for the cleanup. So the properties they don't get sold. So they basically fall into a situation where they're not used. And so what the voluntary cleanup program does is you clean it up to a state standard, you get a certificate from the state saying it's clean, you give that to your buyer, and then they're no longer liable for the cleanup.
Right. And
that makes the properties marketable again.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that some properties end up being not used. I think that kind of is it shows some symmetry to the dock that was being unused, and I think that maybe that part of your life is connected in a way. So you kind of transformed properties when you were a lawyer, and then when you, I guess, went to entrepreneurship is the right word for it.
Yeah.
You transformed the dock, and I think you made a big improvement.
Well, to fit in with your class, the dock itself is, and the way we've got it constructed with the buildings on it, is like, that's a complete man-made facility, right? We didn't have land. We originally had the buildings, well, we've got the old building that you walk past when you come in.
Yeah.
That's on land. We had a problem with flooding. Every time the river would flood, those boats would float up and they would get crushed under the racks.